All right, welcome to the Ravit Show. Very well. Today we have a very special guest. It's none other than Ryan Buick, co-founder Canvas, and we will be discussing a very important topic, which is bringing modern data stack to business teams. So feel free to have your questions coming in. This is a recorded session, but definitely Ryan will be with us real time. If not, feel free to tag him and ask questions. This is a super important topic. Also, like always, we are giving away one annual subscription of 365 Data Science. What you guys need to do is type in hashtag 365 Data Science in the chat. This is what you need to type. It won't give you error, definitely. So feel free to type in that, and what we'll be doing is I'll be picking a winner from the list of folks who've typed in hashtag 365 data science. Also, as I mentioned, don't forget to ask questions to Ryan Buick. He's doing fantastic things in the data world. We'll not only be talking just about modern data stack, but also about data driven culture, about Ryan's journey, what's next for Canvas out there, and obviously the questions that you will be asking. Please feel free to tag Ryan. Without any further ado, and let's not make our guest wait anymore, let's bring up Ryan here. Hey Ryan, welcome to the Ravit Show. How are you?
Hey Ravit, thanks for having me on, man.
Awesome. Yeah, it is much awaited conversation that we are planning since a while now, but finally here we are, and can't wait to obviously learn more about modern data stack, about data driven culture, about Canvas. You're doing some fantastic stuff out there, and I know for a fact where you guys are building something which is super strong. So would love to hear a lot about you, Canvas, about modern data stack, but why not introduce yourself to our audience and we can take it from there.
Awesome. Cool. So let's kick it off. So I'm Ryan. I am one of the founders of Canvas, calling in from San Francisco. And Canvas is really a new tool in the data space. We are really trying to bring the modern data stack to business teams and really giving them a spreadsheet interface so that they can make better, faster decisions more independently on top of the modern data stack that data teams are investing in so heavily everywhere.
Okay. Yeah, this is pretty cool in terms of, like when I looked at Canvas first, I was kind of super intrigued with what you guys have in there. When I looked at just the landing page, it's more like visualize data from any source without SQL, and I'm like, what? but definitely when obviously I spoke to you, I learned so much about it, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted the world to know about it too. And no other way by having you on the show. So thanks for again coming on the show and discussing more about it. But that also brings me to something which is very important, and that would be more on the lines about the path. So what was your path into data and analytics? Like, I know for a fact where audience would love to know more about it, and how did you get into something like this? So yeah, can you share something more?
Yeah, totally. So I've had a bit of a strange path into the data world. Sure. So I guess I'll probably start with really my journey starting at Flexport. So I joined Flexport as one of their first product managers. So I didn't have a background in data, but had built marketplace products before Flexport. And so I joined, I think I was probably the fourth PM there. So there's only a handful of engineers back in 2017. So it was very early, but pretty crazy in terms of the amount of data that Flexport was collecting. For those in your audience that don't know, Flexport is a tech-enabled freight forwarder. So really trying to disrupt this millennia old industry of shipping goods across the ocean, doing air freight, trucking freight, customs brokerage, really anything and everything that a consumer brand would need to get their products from their factory to warehouses, and then ultimately to their consumers. And so when I joined Flexport, it was pretty early stage. So as a product manager, you needed to basically make things happen yourself and get the data that you needed to collect and present, saying, hey, I think we should invest in this area. And I definitely had a ton of anxiety. And I wrote about this a little bit starting out, where, at my previous companies, data was not exactly available for business teams to be able to go and make decisions. And so I didn't have a ton of experience actually just having to work with the data myself. And so, I joined, and you start to look at, you walk in, and we had dashboards in the hallways, and we had, engineers building dashboards and PMs building dashboards. And I didn't really have those skills. I knew a little bit of SQL, but not a lot to be able to query myself and be able to, work with that data independently. And so that was really something that was a bit of an adjustment for me, where I had to come in and I had to prove this out myself. So after a few months there, I actually decided to invest in myself and take a data analytics bootcamp. So I started doing that on nights and weekends, basically learning, like hardcore Excel and cleaning data and working with SQL and doing some sort of like power queries in SQL. And that really opened, my eyes to the world of data and just how really what it takes and the effort that it takes to be able to go in and learn SQL and be able to work with data, especially at an early stage where the data might not be, in the quality that you need it in, be able to wrestle with that data, clean it, be able to make sense of it, and then ultimately present it without having to shoulder tap your engineers, or, we didn't even have a data person at the time, trying to find that person and really hunt them down to help you out. So it was pretty interesting, 5 years ago, starting with no data experience to, seeing what that can look like at a scaling startup like Flexport, and then ultimately deciding to start a company to help others not have to feel that anxiety of having to learn a new skill and work with data themselves.
Yeah, I think that's pretty cool in terms of, where you're coming from is obviously, like you mentioned, that you weren't that open, or you didn't, obviously you've learned SQL over time, and, you've invested that time in yourself. And that's when you've realized that this is one big gap, and that you've come up with a company which is Canvas. Obviously, we'll be talking a lot about Canvas, and I'm sure the audience would also love to know more about what is Canvas, why you built it. I would personally want to know, how did you come up with the name too. So I will ask you that. But before that, obviously, since we are on this topic about Flexport, I know for a fact where supply chain kind of plays a very important role in this space. And when you talk about lots and lots of data, supply chain kind of, it's endless. Like, more the shipping, more the data is coming in. So in your early stage, when you were a PM out there, did you also spend some time in the data at Flexport, or it was then when you decided, when you got obviously a big learning about SQL, and obviously when you got more, gates opening in the data space, did you stick with Flexport for a while, and did you also work in the supply chain more in the data and analytics field? Would love to know more about that.
Yeah, totally. So I joined Flexport when it was pretty early, and that was really one of the things that really differentiated Flexport, was that you had to, our competitors were these companies with 70,000, 80,000 employees, right? And so they can do everything pretty manually. And so as a tech company trying to disrupt that, you had to do a lot more with a lot less in terms of resources. So one of the key things that we used in everything was just looking at data and being able to make really efficient decisions. So that was something that was born in the company's DNA. So you would walk down the hallways, there's TVs of dashboards. Every single decision that had to be made was, you had to come to the table with, hey, these are the metrics that we're trying to drive. We would do OKRs. So every team was, had data-driven OKRs. For those of you who don't know, the OKR is basically a goal-setting process. Yeah. So every quarter, these teams, the PM would go up and in front of the entire org, say, hey, here's where we're at in terms of our metric. We're trying to increase this metric by 5 to 10% by doing X, Y, Z, right? And so I think that was something that was huge for trying to come into this, space that's been relatively the same and not a very good experience, frankly, for people trying to ship their goods. You had low visibility into where your goods were. The pricing was very, opaque, to put it generously. And so Flexport, really the value there was being able to go to logistics teams at consumer brands and say, hey, you're going to get a quote that's transparent. It's going to make sense. You're going to be able to book without having to talk to anybody. You're going to be able to watch your shipments move across the country on rail, on truck, or move across the ocean on an airplane or on a cargo ship. And you'll be able to see key milestones. You'll be able to get notifications so that you can adjust your supply chain proactively instead of being reactive, which in the freight world is how you either make or lose your money as a logistics team, right? Because you start to add up basically per day, per hour charges, right? It's all about efficiency. So if your truck is stuck at the port, you're paying hourly for that truck idling, right? If your goods are mislabeled, you're paying for that. This is how these freight forwarders make their cash. It's they're basically stacking up all these incidental charges that happen during the shipment. So our job at Flexport was to be able to come in and be able to predict what's going to happen on this shipment. And of course, you can't predict, hurricanes. You can't predict port strikes. You can't predict a lot of how the world actually works. But what you can try to do is make that experience transparent as possible to the customer and show them, hey, here's likely the charges that are going to be incurred by this carrier or by this provider. Here's this route that you're taking. There might be common delays on this route, and really try to set expectations and also communicate clearly when those events happen. Hey, these are the things that are happening, and try to give the client peace of mind, which if you're getting your daily or weekly updates via PDF, via email from another freight forwarder, it's not exactly proactive. So we try to take all of that data that we're collecting from carriers, from ports, and be able to surface that automatically when it happens.
Wow, this is great information that you're sharing, Ryan, because what it comes down to is how startups kind of work, and how freight industry is completely different, but it has a lot of data when you're talking about even the external factors affecting the cost. That's the data that you're kind of providing to the customer, and it's a forecast for you. But like you mentioned, obviously natural calamities can happen, and it could be a completely game changer. So, and there could be a lot of cost which could be incurred to even the Flexport too. But I think that's how maybe obviously your team out there have got into the data bit, and you've understood how important the role is of data, and predicting those metrics and getting it to right to the customer. And obviously with that experience, you've come out and you built your own company too now, which is Canvas. So coming back to obviously what I wanted to learn more about was about your company, like what is Canvas, and I'm sure the audience would love to know more about it too, like, and why did you start the company? What was the reason behind it? Would love to know more.
Yeah. So diving a little bit more into the experience of Flexport, which is really what inspired us building Canvas. So I was a product manager there. We saw really the evolution of data at this company that's supposed to be a blue chip Silicon Valley company, and saw just how hard it was even for us to be able to work with data and the data team to service all the different stakeholders. So there's a relatively small data team at Flexport that was responsible for servicing, by the time I left, there's 2,500 employees at Flexport over 3 years. And I joined as I think the 200th employee. So in that environment, data teams can only move so fast, right? You can only collect and centralize so much data. And we saw, a tremendous investment in building out the modern data stack and building out all of these tools and building out a data culture, so that, these business teams could move really quickly. And we saw really just how hard it was for that to happen. And so you saw operators, right, operations employees, frankly, non-technical teams, having to, light up our Slack channel saying, hey, I need this, can you fetch me the SQL query? Or, hey, I have this question that's sort of loosely modeled. And you saw, the data team go through a couple different evolutions of a centralized agency model to an embedded analyst model, and just how quickly those things can change over time, and how quickly things can break or get fixed. And so really we were inspired because we worked on an internal data product at Flexport, and we saw how difficult it was for these operators to, they have their dashboards. And I think this is the problem that's more or less solved by this point is, you can build dashboards, you can put them in front of your business teams, but what happens with those everyday questions, right? We call them sort of ad hoc or data exploration today. But at Flexport, we saw just, longer and longer lines for teams that had everyday questions and needed to get answered beyond, the SQL query that was in the dashboard, right? They wanted to see different cuts or slices and dices of that data. Right. And that's really hard, right? It requires a conversation, a ticket, at some companies between the stakeholder and the data team. You have to get on the same page in terms of context, right? I know where, as a data person, I know the data model. As a business person, I have no idea what the data model looks like, but I have a loose question. And so we saw how difficult it was for these teams to collaborate, how difficult it was to, provide timely responses to these requests. And even when you get a response back, as an operator, you probably want to see it and, okay, I have 12 new questions that I want to ask now that I've seen the answer to my original question. And so it's this thing that snowballs where we started to question a lot of the sort of traditional request response workflow that we see at so many startups. And our thesis was, well, what if we can take a lot of these common data models and put a spreadsheet interface on top of it? So that you didn't need to learn SQL, right? You didn't need to go through the nights and weekends exercise that I went through to be able to ask different questions of the data. And so that's really what Canvas is we sit on top of the modern data stack. We also let you connect to any other tools or apps if you want, and we'll put you on a managed data stack. And we let really data teams reduce their ad hoc request volumes by giving business teams a interface that they're comfortable with. So you can put whatever models, whatever tables you want in front of them. We integrate with dbt, so you can embed your definitions and descriptions of the tables and fields. And you can really let business teams graduate from what we saw at Flexport, which was Google Sheets that are being manually maintained for reporting for these business teams. And you can start to automate that and put that into a governed system that's more real time. And let those business users actually start to automate their sheets, let them start to explore the data on an everyday basis, and let them get 80% of the way there, 90% of the way there with their analysis or questions, and then collaborate with the data team to get across that last 20%. Instead of the status quo today, which is, I have a question, I go through a bunch of dashboards, I don't know where the data lives, I don't know what I'm even looking for, so I just go into line and ask a question, right? And so really the goal of Canvas is to try to, make data teams more efficient by giving them time back to focus on what matters, but also to give business teams really the ability to confidently and independently work with data like they haven't before. And if they do get stuck, give both teams a way to collaborate and promote positive feedback loops so that everyone can just make faster, better decisions without spending a ton of time going back and forth in a Slack channel over questions.
Yeah. No, I think for a fact, first of all, great work that you've done already for Canvas, and a great inspiration that you've had from Flexport, and then you've applied it in your own business. So fantastic and great work there, Ryan. And one quick question that I had, obviously, I was running through the website of Canvas, and when I was in the about section, I could see so many folks who support Canvas. There are so many CEOs and I could also see the CEO of Flexport who supports the initiative. So would love to know more about it, how how folks in these big shot CEOs have been supporting Canvas, obviously in what you guys have put together. Would love to know more about a little about that as well.
Yeah, totally. So we've been super lucky to really bring on a team of angel investors, advisors, and also institutions to help us really try to make data more accessible and easier for everyone. So we started about 1.5 years ago, and we raised our seed round from Sequoia Capital. who have been incredible in helping us out in terms of, really trying to frame this problem of, hey, we have, a fraction of, 5% of most startups know SQL. The other 95, really their experience, that last mile of the modern data stack is broken. And so we've been able to really work with an amazing team of investors who have all felt this pain pretty personally, right, as operators, and also bring on data experts in the space that have seen this problem from the other side. And I think this is one of those things where we look at the past 10 years of BI and, we have more data than ever. We have, it's pretty standard practice to have dashboards for most organizations. But really, there is still a lot of pain and a lot of problems in terms of, okay, what does it mean to get data driven beyond just having a dashboard and referencing some metrics every week or every month, right? How do we enable these startups to actually use their data quickly and efficiently? So yeah, that's been sort of our journey in terms of fundraising, and really working with those operators to really understand their pain, and go help out, the companies that they've worked at in the past, or are part of their portfolio or whatever.
Wow. So that's some real work. Obviously, before even setting the ground, you've actually worked with a ton of, obviously, these are small plus mid-sized companies whom you've worked with. And I'm sure I would now count Flexport as the big size company, which has 2,500 employees. So great work there, Ryan. Thanks for that information. Also, you touched on a very important topic while you were answering this question, was about having the data-driven culture. So, want to shift gears a bit here, and obviously want to learn more about data-driven culture. We've obviously heard a lot about data-driven culture now, and my question is obviously to founders like you, what's an ideal way for organizations to be data-driven? What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, totally. So, I've had the chance to talk to hundreds of founders and early stage startup employees about, both sides, right? Talking to data teams and talking to business teams about, how they see, their teams being data driven. And I think, there's a couple key things that have to happen. I think one is, and most importantly, is the culture, right? It's easy to say, we're data driven. And like I mentioned, just, be able to resort and fall back to a couple of dashboards that get referenced. But for us, that really doesn't mean you're data driven, frankly. To be data driven, you really need to be able to approach every problem from first principles, right? And like I said, at Flexport, you weren't able to, no one wants to see your opinion on things, right? They want to see the objective facts. And then you can start to say, okay, well, how did this come to be? Or how is your proposed solution going to be able to drive those metrics, right? But I think from a process standpoint, that's one of the first things that I think has to be embedded in the organization for you to say that you're truly data-driven and that you're working on actually applying data to every single decision that you make, right? And so I think it's really important to start this early. It becomes harder and harder to do this as time goes on, not only from a systems level perspective, but also from a process perspective, right? So I think the things that we see that are working are teams that from day one are reporting on their metrics, right? They are sharing with their investors and their investor updates. Hey, here's our metrics. Here's the reality of the boots on the ground. You're, hopefully not forcing, but if you have to, you are forcing your teams into habits, right? Have weekly, metrics reviews, have goals that your teams are all going out and saying, hey, let them come up with the actual metrics that they want to hit. Don't tell them what to do, right? Say, this is the strategy what we want to go in, but how is this going to affect the numbers, right? And so it's really about, I think, spreading within the culture of your organization. Hey, let's start with the numbers, right? Know your numbers, build your numbers together so that you actually understand them, and require that up front. Because it's fine if the project or the feature doesn't hit those numbers, but if you have them instrumented, then there's no guessing, right? And I think that's another big part here is the instrumentation and the systems level work that's required to get data driven is often something that we see is pushed back because it's there's still a couple problems there in terms of implementing it. So Um, I think that's the biggest thing, is starting early, forcing good habits with your teams, and being okay when, things don't affect the numbers or things don't push the numbers in the direction that you want. But it's absolutely a requirement to have those things instrumented and not going into projects blind.
Yeah, I really like your approach there, where you mention more about having those numbers instrumented at least, because it also gives you that push, and that's not a forcey push, but it's like more on the lines where you want to achieve those numbers, and it takes you there, where, and that's truly obviously more, having that data driven culture. And like rightly mentioned, that you have to start that early. Obviously you can't have that culture built up suddenly, and if you are you wanting to have it like from small scale and then scale it up a bit. But that, obviously these are great insights, but that also brings me to one important question. I've spoken to a lot of CEOs out there who are owning big startups now, and even small startups. What they still have that problem of having that data driven culture. And like, what do you think, Ryan? Why is that happening? Are they not wanting to get to those, like you mentioned, obviously not instrument those numbers, or is it something else which is affecting that data driven culture to be implemented in their startups?
Yeah, totally. And I think we see a lot of the same things. I think for all the advancements that we've made on the modern data stack and getting data driven and having the availability of data, I think there's still a ton of problems with
Oh,
how do you start, right? And I see a lot of founders that don't come from a data background, right? They're coming from either an engineering background or a business background, and you see the current state of the modern data stack, and you see the diagrams of all the different players, of all the different aspects.
true.
I think, frankly, it's very intimidating. A lot of these founders don't know where to start, and they see the inertia of getting started beyond just having some reporting in sheets, or maybe a couple dashboards here and there. It's pretty intimidating. There's a pretty high barrier to entry in terms of understanding this space, understanding the different aspects that are required at different stages, and then being able to implement them effectively, right? So I think there's a couple things that happen if you don't do that, right? You start too late, then it gets harder and harder to wrangle all the data together. You start to have more and more, inaccurate or bad quality data that you have to wrangle. And then I think the worst part is you start to see these silos form from team to team, where it becomes so hard to generate the numbers and present the numbers and go through that exercise of being able to get the metrics and track the metrics, that you avoid it altogether. And you just say, hey, it's too hard. We'll put it off for another quarter until we get someone who can help us. So I think there's a lot of pain there, and not understanding the space, and therefore kicking the can down the road.
Right.
But I also do think that the mechanics of actually implementing the stack are hard, and you have to know the tools. You have to be able to afford the tools. You have to be able to afford the people that can implement those tools. And so that's a real opportunity that I think what we've seen, where there's a lot of early stage startups that maybe don't want to, go full bore into, okay, we're going to hire data consultants, we're going to hire data contractors, we're going to hire a data team, and then we're going to spend all this money on building out this data stack, when it's not exactly clear to them, okay, what is the ROI going to be? How long is this going to take? And then we're going to be on the hook for actually working with these folks to maintain it after it's implemented, right? Because we know that implementing the data stack is just really the first step. And so I think all of those reasons result in sort of this not being a reality until you get to the 100-person stage, until you get to hiring a data team, which makes their job even harder when they come in, to be able to say, hey, first we're going to need to lock down on data quality. We're going to need to agree upon definitions. We're going to need to do all these things from a process perspective before you even get to the implementation. And so I still think we have a lot of work to do as an industry in terms of making this approachable, and making this easier and lowering the barriers to entry to really getting data driven and setting up a modern data stack.
Okay, this is fantastic information that you've shared, Brian. Thanks for that. Also, in terms of, since we are on this topic of modern data stack, I have a question, which is, I'm sure most of the audience who would be joining us have this question as well. So, in terms of the like, I would love to know your take. What problems has the modern data stack solved for the business teams, and what problems actually remain? Would love to know more about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think what the modern data stack has been great at is providing a pretty much best of breed, set of focus tools for each part of the stack, right? You don't have a ton of lock-in anymore, right? You're not stuck with, this all-in-one provider, this vendor that's, going to be doing a lot of these things, but maybe doesn't have a core competency on one particular stack. And so I think we've done a really great job of making this easier for the consumer in terms of being able to navigate and pull, piece together the different parts and move off of one part if that's not working, right?
Right.
I think you've seen, DBT as emerge as, one of the most exciting parts of the stack, right? And really getting these data teams to, have the benefits of engineering processes, right, that have been around for, the past 2 decades, and applying that to data so that it's more scalable and it's more accurate and it's more reasonable for the organization. But there's a flip side of that as well, which I think is still the problems that exist, which is, yes, you have all these different parts, but buying that stack now as a customer can often feel like, you're not going to a dealership to buy a car. You're going to a dealership to buy, you ask for one thing and they say, well, hey, we just do this one part, but go over to this other dealership and they're going to help you with that other part of the car. And so the experience can now feel like you're, trying to build the car rather than buy the car in some cases.
True.
And so I think we have a lot of work to do there. I still think it's, fairly expensive and intimidating, that we've talked about, to build out the stack. And I think a lot of the tools that we use for the front end of the stack, right, you have these interfaces that, like we talked about, are good for dashboards, right? They're good for strategic metrics. But I think they're actually taking away a lot of the value of the modern data stack in terms of, hey, let's give an interface that's more self-serve, that's more comfortable for these business people to actually be able to work with them rather than just make a request, right? Because we do have a lot of tools in the BI space, but we still have, frankly, an analytics channel or a ticketing system that comes along with that, which still just does not feel very self-service to me. And so I think we have a lot of progress there to do as well. And I think the last part, which is starting to really come up more and more, is the iteration and the feedback loops between the business and the data teams. You have, every time a business wants to add a new field, right, or collect new data in one of their tools, there's now this, again, supply chain of changes that need to be made throughout the stack to account for that. And so I think we've made a ton of progress in terms of making things accurate and reliable, but it's not the fastest iterative process for business teams and data teams. And so I think we see a lot of waiting time between, line of business owner wanting a new initiative and that data actually being reflected in the different systems and that data being available for them to then work with. And so I think we have a lot of work to do when it comes to closing these feedback loops and closing these cycles between data and business teams, so that business teams can say, hey, here's the direction that we want to go in. And data teams have a seat at the table to say, okay, well, here's what's needed, just like you would with engineering, right? You would never build something as a business owner and say, okay, engineering, we're just going to do this after. It's like, no, it's a collaborative process. And I think data teams more and more are being treated like they have a seat at the table and they're involved in that collaborative process when a new initiative happens, rather than saying, oh, wait, we just changed all of these things. Hey, can you fix this? And now we're scrambling on the back end, right? So I think that's some of the challenges that still remain with the modern data stack. And I think we're making good progress, but it is still a pretty I'd call it well-defined silos between business and data teams, when I don't think the future should look like that at all.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is, Brian, obviously data quality kind of plays a very important role in this, and also the data reliability that plays a very important role in the modern data stack. And that also brings me to something that I would love to know from you, and how you are solving that problem for the companies that you're working for. Is first of all, how do you define data quality, and what's your approach to delivering data quality to the businesses, or to business maybe?
Yeah, totally. So this comes up a lot where we have customers that are excited. The data team, integrates their warehouse and their DBT project. And I think one of the exciting things is that we really give the business teams a lot of their first aha moment is, wow, I've never seen my data like this before. I've never been able to just interact with it as if I'm in Google Sheets, but it's in real time. I've never been able to slice and dice it this much. I've never been able to join different tables together. And so I think a lot of the sort of first couple of weeks of our customers' experience is there's a lot of feedback that wasn't happening between the data and the business teams around data quality and around making that data usable. So I'll start maybe with data quality, which is like the obvious stuff, right? It's making sure that the data is accurate, it's clean, there's no test data in there, it's reliable, right? You don't have teams saying, hey, I have this sheet and this says one number, and then I have, in the warehouse that says this one number, right? So there's often that exercise of getting onto the same page, which I think we really help with a lot in terms of making the data more accessible and therefore creating a conversation around that data between the business and data teams. So I think that's often the first real step is, okay, we're making the data usable, we're making it accessible, but is it actually quite high quality? Is it agreed upon? Is it well defined? And so I think that's the first thing that really we try to focus on with our customers is creating that open exploration and accessibility, and then fixing the problems that come with that.
Right. I think Kudita, this is like fantastic explanation about data quality and how you are, obviously solving that problem for the businesses. So thanks for that, Ryan. Also, I know for a fact where, like I have a question around data quality. One more, don't want to overwhelm you with the data quality questions, but it kind of plays a very important role, at least in the business that you are in. So wanted to ask, is there a difference between data quality and data usability? Is it like complete? Is it discoverable? How does that kind of, because I'm sure this is one of the questions which kind of come to you a lot. And, if there's a difference, would love to know more about the data quality and data usability of it.
Yeah, totally. So I think the first part is, I think a cleaner sort of understanding, right? Is the data, quality there, right? Is it agreed upon? Is it clean? Data usability is where it gets a little bit more subjective, right? And so I think that's really the second stage that we see with a lot of our customers, where sure, the data is high quality, but is it actually usable? And so I think this is one of the big hurdles that a lot of data teams face with, self-service, right? And so how do we actually make it so that it makes sense to the business user, where you're not getting a ton of questions still? You're not still in this ad hoc hole that you're trying to climb out of, that your data team can't scale out of. And so I think from a data usability perspective, it's, has the data been modeled, right? Have the common questions that the business teams are going to have those been accounted for? And this is often a pretty painful scoping exercise that has to happen between the business teams and the data teams. But it's one that is, I think, ultimately well worth the reduction in requests that you're probably going to get down the line if you don't do this exercise up front, right? So if we see teams using DBT, obviously, for creating these big wide tables that can actually be explored without having to do a bunch of joins, right? And I think this is something that our product really shines a light on, which is the interaction isn't going to be going to some dashboard and filtering or sorting for something, or maybe playing with some filters. It is, no, you can actually take this big wide table and interact with it just like you're in Sheets. And so I think there's a lot of questions that come saying, hey, I've got this one model that I can use and explore, but I want to now join it with this other data, and I want to be able to ask different questions of it. And so I think that's really where the line gets drawn in terms of, is this data usable? Are you able to answer the majority of questions that folks have about the data without, hey, what does this column mean, right? What is this metric computed of? Being able to see the lineage or calculated of, and being able to see the lineage there. being able to show your work and make it clear to these business teams, hey, you can trust this analysis, right? It's incorporating these things. And so I think there's another big hurdle between having data that's quality and then having data that's usable. And that can only come from a feedback loop, like I mentioned, between the folks using the data and the folks providing the data. And so the more that we can, and it's often an uncomfortable conversation, right? It's something, okay, are we comfortable putting this data in the hands of business teams? Are they going to be shooting themselves in the foot with making mistakes? Sure, they might, but they're already doing this in spreadsheets anyway when they export the CSVs out of whatever system that you're giving them. So why not bring this into a governable system? Why not get insights on how your business teams are using this data so that you can ultimately have a discussion and you can invest in making your models more extensible and making your data more usable, rather than, okay, this is really painful working with this business team. They take a lot of time, so we're just going to put this fence up and throw some things over it occasionally, and hopefully they get what they need. So it's a tough exercise, but I think it's one that has to happen, and I think it's where we're going, or else data teams won't be able to scale to help their organizations as they grow.
Yeah, I think these are beautiful insights on the data quality and about also the usability and you know the first hand information that you're sharing is very useful. So thanks for that. And also, I know for a fact where you kind of touched on a word which was around governance, and that also brings me to one question which I'm kind of wondering. I know for a fact where modern data stack also has governance, which is playing a very important role. What's your take on data governance, and how does it fit in the Canvas world, or is it still something which you kind of a little away? I'm sure you might be, wanting to, uh, like, I'm kind of wanting to know, are you into it, like, or where does it fit in Canvas as of now?
Yeah, totally. So I think there's obviously, tools that are specializing in this,
Yeah.
in observability and governance and making sure that
Yeah.
there's a single source of truth. I think the metrics layers is super exciting, the hot topic du jour. But I think what it really starts with is being able to say, hey, do we have a source of truth, right? Do we have a reliable pipeline of data that's going to these end use cases, right? Are we all using the same definition of this data that's being piped, throughout the entire organization or being used by whoever? And so I think that's a big first step, is being able to say, okay, let's observe where all this data is being used. Let's look for blind spots. Let's be able to say, hey, this is a certified, metric, or this is a certified model, right? This has been trusted. Giving flexibility on top of that for saying, okay, teams, now that you can interact with this stuff, maybe creating a differentiator between data that's, being adjusted or being worked on further beyond what was the certified model. And so I think a lot of it has to start with just the visibility and knowing where things are being used. And that's really what we try to do, which is, not force you to go through some hoops of creating, consumption data on your metrics, but rather give that to you out of the box. So who in the business is working with which models the most, how are they using that data? How are they joining it? Which DIMS and facts tables are being joined together, right? Who's exporting data out of this system, right? Because you should probably want to know that, right? A lot of data leaders are like, hey, if it's happening out of our BI tool, it's not our responsibility. That might be true when, you get an email late at night saying, hey, this number was off, or we made a bad decision because of this number. And you can point back to saying, hey, that was in a CSV, not my problem. But if that starts to keep happening, it probably is going to become your problem.
Right?
And so I think that's a big step that we have to take as an industry, is saying, hey, people are going to use the data in however which way. Let's not try to confine that or say, hey, it's not our job, but let's rather raise the visibility there and continue to have this collaboration and conversation between these teams so that they can still do their job and work with the data and how they want, at the same time, not sacrificing data quality and not sacrificing governance.
Governance. Right. Very, very nice answer there. And thanks for that. I love the way how you elaborate and you get into all the details and how it, obviously works. I'm sure the audience kind of, obviously are getting their golden nuggets today. So amazing. Also, wanted to know, in your opinion, what should we be looking, and keeping an eye on in terms of the data and analytics trends? You are there, you're doing, obviously staying on top of all these things. So for our audience, can you tell us the the trends we should actually have an eye on?
Yeah, trends we should have an eye on. So I'll stay on sort of, the last mile piece. Obviously, the metrics layer is a big one, right? Trying to come up with, an agreed upon consolidated definition of your metrics and whatever system that they're going to be used in. I think that's going to be huge. And we see a lot of companies that are trying to tackle this.
Yep.
I think we're seeing, DBT go from, sort of having this very, very, involved community to now more and more folks that are not from the data space and more folks that are interacting with DBT and not necessarily, knowing what it is. So I think DBT becoming mainstream is another huge trend that we're going to see, and what that does to the industry and what that does to consumption. And then I think lastly, data catalogs and being able to see, okay, here's all of the different interfaces for this data, but here's what it means. Here's how it's calculated. Being able to see where it's being used. I think a lot of that observability, data cataloging, consumption, feedback. There's going to be a lot of tooling on, now that we have this modern data stack and we're making it more available to everyone, how do we actually make the most of that and get feedback on those interactions?
Yeah, these are interesting trends, definitely worth looking at him. I've like on the show as well, I've spoken to folks who've been in the data observability space, and it's getting super hot out there. Obviously, Matrix here is another one, and like you mentioned, obviously keep an eye on DBT, which will be like mainstream. So yeah, those are interesting points. Thanks for sharing those. Also, that brings me to another important question, which is more on the lines, about the future of self-service and how does it look like? According to you, what are your thoughts around it, Ryan?
Yeah, definitely something we're thinking a lot about. I think the first is, like I mentioned, it's how do we get away from this request response workflow, right? It's, I think self-service has largely been a buzzword that we throw out, and it's like, okay, you say, we're working on our self-service, and then you ask the head of data, how much time is their team is being spent on strategic projects versus ad hoc questions, and they say, well, it's 80-20 ad hoc versus strategic, when it in self-service would mean those numbers are flipped, right? And so I think we have a lot of work to do when it comes to getting away from that request response workflow. I think and that's really not an easy task. That means making your data high quality. It means making your data usable. It means making your data discoverable. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And then I think we're also seeing just like the rise of the citizen data scientist, right? We're seeing 10 years ago, the problem was there wasn't enough data. 5 years ago, the problem is, okay, now we have a lot of data, but we don't know how to use it, right? We don't know how to make it high quality. We don't know how to make it usable. And I think now the next step is, how do we actually shift the onus away from the data team being the owner of this to every information worker, every member of your organization being able to be data driven, right? And so you're starting to see a lot of folks that they used to be operational roles, now they're becoming data roles. They're becoming more strategic roles, right? As automation happens, you're spending a lot less time on what you used to spend. And so I think that's going to be another trend to look out for, and something certainly that we're making a bet on, which is you're going to be having more and more analytically minded folks in the organization. And how do you actually give them the tools that they need to be able to do their jobs without relying on the data team?
Okay. Yeah, pretty cool. This is interesting. Also, I know for a fact we've spoken a lot around data and analytics. We've spoken a lot around data-driven culture, data quality, data usability, reliability, I think observability. So we've covered a good ground, a good modern data stack problems as well that we've discussed. Would love to also know about Canvas and the future of Canvas, because I know you guys are new in the game, but not so new, and you're doing some fantastic stuff out there. So would love to know more about Canvas, what's next that is coming up. I know for a fact there are openings, you guys are hiring as well. So can you tell us more about it, Ryan?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we launched in February of this year. So spent a lot of time building, the sheet interface, a data tool, a Figma-like collaboration component. It's a pretty wide surface area product to be built. So a lot of building still, and definitely looking for help on folks that want to help us build really the future of data exploration and data visualization for business teams. So we're hiring engineers, hiring analytics engineers, working on a really interesting stack. So it's all Rust and WebGL and WebAssembly, pretty cutting edge stuff in terms of making this real time, performance, a native app feel in the browser with large data sets. So tons of interesting problems on the engineering and data front there. And really for Canvas, I think what we're continuing to do is really try to prove out, hey, you can actually take, your trusted data, right? If you focus on data quality and you focus on data usability, you can actually shift a lot of this onus to your business teams, right? And make it easier for them to own their dashboards, make it easier for them to own their everyday questions and own their metrics in a way that, couldn't really happen before. So we're working a lot with, early stage startups who, don't want to spend time and resources on building out their own modern data stacks. So we actually have a managed data stack for them that they can just connect their apps in their database and be able to work with that data without, a huge pull up. And then also continuing to invest in, larger companies, growth stage startups that have a DBT project that's well maintained, but they're still on the hook for providing, answers to everyday questions. They're still on the hook for managing and iterating on dashboards. And really, we're trying to make them more efficient and shift a lot of that onus, like I said, to the business teams to be able to do that work. So lots to build, but it's exciting. You can actually sign up on our site. So we're a product-led growth company. So there's a freemium tier, free trial that you can get started with, connect your data. You don't have to talk to us, and be able to really see for yourself and work with the tool. Happy to chat and hopefully help whoever out.
Yeah, this is fantastic, Ryan. Thanks for that information. Obviously, one question that I'm sure the audience here also have is if they want to reach out to you, learn more about Canvas, also get into the detailings in terms of the platform, how does it work, and all of those things. Which is the best place to reach out to you first, and then obviously also I know for a fact you write a lot of blogs. I've read most of them, and if they want to learn more about it, which is the best place?
Yeah, totally. So we, like you mentioned, post a lot on Twitter and LinkedIn. So Twitter is @Canvas. LinkedIn, you can find us, it's Canvas App. And then our website is canvasapp.com /sign up. And yeah, like I mentioned, you can connect your DBT project, your data warehouse, and start putting in front of your business teams. So you can try it out for a few weeks, and you can also reach out to me on email. It's hello@canvasapp.com. Would love to learn more about the challenges that you're facing when it comes to self-service, and hopefully help you out.
Awesome, Ryan. This is amazing. Love the conversation today, and you've shared some amazing insights for those who've joined us and asked questions, and for those who still have questions for Ryan, feel free to reach out to him on LinkedIn. He's also shared his email, so don't hesitate. Thanks a lot, Ryan, for visiting the Ravit Show. It was such a pleasure to have you and talk about data-driven culture, modern data stack, data quality, observability,
all of it,
governance, all in there. And you've shared everything. You've actually given us the flavor of all the stacks out there. So thanks a lot once again. We can't wait to do a 2.0 session with Canvas and have more leaders coming on the show from Canvas. So thanks a lot once again for visiting the Ravit Show, and also to our audience, thanks for joining in today and asking questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. Let's do it again.
Awesome.